Today, we're looking at Diamine's Vermillion. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Now, there's timestamps down below so that you can skip around, but if you got the time, I'd appreciate you checking out the entire video. Also, if you're interested, you can follow me on Instagram, and if you're new here, I would invite you to subscribe. In order to make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I then put the ink into this Jinhao 51A with a fine nib, wrote with it for a day, and used it to take the notes for this video. In order to have some standardization in my writing samples, I always use Clairfontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. Now, let's look at the writing sample. I picked this ink up in sample form, and to keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's take a look at the Clairfontaine. We get no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 at the top had a little bit of color variation, not tons of color variation. It had no feather, spread, no halo, and no sheen. The extra fine had no feather, spread, halo, sheen, plenty of shading throughout. The shading is very nice in how it's working here. What it's doing is it's really giving us some nice dark and some nice light spaces. It's truly very nice to see the lighter at the Q and much darker at the K on quick. 12 seconds to dry. With the medium, we had no feather, spread, halo, sheen, plenty of shading again. Still, lots of really good shading. When you look at what's going on in the word dog, the D starts very light, it goes to a slightly darker tone, it gets lighter again at the O, nice and dark at the G. 15 seconds to dry. The scrubby shows us we should see some color variation, and we do. And the smear test, yeah, we see how long it's taking to dry. Tomoe River, no bleed, very, very minor ghosting, minor at best. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo, sheen. The 1.1 has no shading, which is very unusual for what this particular ink is doing. The extra fine has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and it still offers plenty of shading that goes throughout. Now, it's not as much as we see on some other papers, but the shading we do see is very nice. It took 19 seconds to dry. Look at the shade that goes on in over. Starts nice as a mid-tone, gets lighter at the top of the O to V, darker back into the ER. Very nice stuff. The medium, no feather, spread, halo, sheen, plenty of shading still. Again, for Tomoe River, that to me doesn't seem to shade a whole lot because it lets the ink sit on top. It does very well with this. Now, the shading that's going on, again, if you look at it, it's just, I don't see shading happen like this with red inks. I'm dumbfounded. It's truly amazing. 23 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby shows us that we should get some color variation. Minor. We do get more in the writing than we get in the scrubby. And it does show us that we get different tones, although oddly, the extra fine in the scrubby looks darker than the medium, but in the writing, the medium's darker than the extra fine. Rhodia. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo, sheen. Again, very little shade goes on with the 1.1. So while we do get plenty of areas that get good shade, the 1.1 doesn't seem to be the nib that really is doing it here. The extra fine has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. Minor shading that's going on. Not as much as I would have expected having seen the others, but we are seeing some minor shading. Minor being that we're going from nice dark tone with the B to a mid-tone at the O, or that we see words that look just a little bit lighter on the back end, like lazy starts dark and turns to a mid-tone. Not a tremendous amount of color variation, but we are seeing it. Now, the medium, no feather spread, halo sheen, and again, we're still seeing some shading going on. When we look at the word lazy, it starts dark in the letter A. It gets some lighter areas. Z is a little bit lighter. It gets dark at the bottom. Back dark up into the Y. Very nice. And 16 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby for both show us some color variation, and we do see some color variation in both of these. I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left, we see that it's pushing immediately up. It starts as a very light red. It works its way darker all the way up, but this is a true prime red. There's no mixing or anything fancy about this particular red. The one on the right, I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into water. Now the line across the bottom does look slightly darker, but not much darker. It does push up basically the same way. The only difference we see between these two chromatographies is a slightly darker line at the bottom of the one that was let dry. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, it's handling itself pretty well. That extra fine goes to about a fine medium, but it holds up very well. It doesn't feather and blow out all over the place, which would make me feel uncomfortable using it as a note taker. Now water go ahead, it's reactivating, it's lifting most all of this ink. I really do think, given more than 30 seconds on the paper, that water is going to be all that it takes to get this off the page. We do start to see some of the dots of the Rhodia paper coming through. Now, Pen Flush did less than water did, which is kind of strange. It normally doesn't work that way for us, but that's kind of how it went. I just don't think that the extra fluids you're using with Pen Flush are giving you what you need here. 1/3 bleach solution did completely obliterate it from the page, but there's no need to use a 1/3 bleach solution to get this out of your pen. I test viscosity or flow with a thing called a tilt test. I'll link it somewhere down below or up in the cards. Now, for the inks I've tested, I have found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Diamine's Vermillion has a viscosity or flow of 1.7, making it a wetter ink. To find my average dry times, I use my writing samples done on Clairfontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. I average those, and what I found is the average dry time is 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Diamine's Vermillion has an average dry time of 17 seconds, making it not just normal, but average. Instead of finding inks that look like Diamine's Vermillion, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. I was looking at a really nice turquoise, and I went with Birmingham Pen Company's Point Park Fountain Turquoise. The second writing sample is going to be done on Limone paper, black and red notebooks, and Gilelo laid paper. Looking at Limone paper, we see that it gets a lot of bleed through. It gets a lot of ghosting as a result of all of that bleed through. In the 1.1, in all of them, really, to make it easy, we do get a lot of feather, we do get a lot of spread. This is much thicker writing than we saw on the previous writing examples, and it's just this paper. It's much more fibrous. It doesn't work as well as I was really expecting when I had gotten it. The 1.1 has feather spread. It has no halo, no sheen, and no shading. The extra fine has feather, it has spread, it has no halo, no sheen. It has minor shading that goes on. Minor shading meaning that it's got some lighter places. Not a lot though, just a few. It took 7 seconds to dry. Medium is slightly darker a tone than the extra fine. It had feather, it has spread. It has no halo, it has no sheen, it has some shading that's going on. When we look at the J in jumps, we see it's lighter on the left and gets darker as it works to the right. I know that's where my thumb often goes. When we look at what's going on in lazy, it's nice and dark most of the time, but at the top loop in the Z, it starts to get a little bit lighter and it gets darker. At the beginning of the Y, top part of the Y on the right, a little bit lighter, dark again. We do get areas that show some color variation in the writing. Now, that took 8 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both show us no color variation, although we did get a little, it wasn't a lot. just minor. Black and red notebook. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, no halo, no sheen, no shading in the 1.1. The extra fine has no feather, spread, halo, sheen. It does offer some shading throughout a bunch of the writing. It offers the shade in very much the same way that we got with the Clairfontaine. Now, that's because we see here it's darker on the left side of the Q. It gets lighter, gets darker in the down sweep, lighter in the up. So we get a lot of that where it's darker in the down, lightens up in the upstroke. It's very nice shading that's going on. 9 seconds to dry. In the medium, it's a little bit darker tone overall, which makes you automatically think you're going to get a little less shading, but that's not really true. It has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and it still offers some shading, which is very nice in what it's doing. We're still getting the darker in the downstroke, lighter in the upstroke, just like we're seeing with Quick. Just like we're seeing with the O, it's lighter or darker coming down, it gets lighter, and as it turns to get down again, a darker part in the O. It's very nice shading that's going on. 10 seconds to dry for the medium. Now, the scrubby of the extra fine and the medium show us no color variation, although that does not match what we got in the writing sample. G Lalo, this is a laid paper. We get no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and no shade. Now we lose a lot of the shading that goes on here, and that's because of the gray paper. When it comes to the extra fine, we have no feather, spread, halo, sheen. The shading is coming through very nice with the extra fine. We definitely see a lot of lighter areas and darker areas, like when you look at Quick. Darker on the left side of the Q, lighter on the right side of the Q. Very nice. Brown, very nice, darker downstrokes, lighter upstrokes. It's absolutely beautiful. 7 seconds to dry. The medium is a noticeably darker tone than we got with the extra fine. The medium had no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and yes, it still had some shading, although not as noticeable. When you look at the, it's much lighter at the top of the T and it gets darker as it works down. When you look at over, it starts very dark. It goes to a mid-tone, it gets dark at the R again. Very nice. 9 seconds to dry. Now because of the gray paper again, with the extra fine and medium scrubby, we see no color variation, but that does not show with what we got compared to the writing sample. So what do I think of Diamine's Vermillion? This is a solid red that puts down very consistent shading with most every nib that I chose to use. As far as choosing a best pen for performance, because the shading is so consistent and the color is very nice, I see the nib size and pen wide open in what you can use to get great shading and great color. If you've made it this far and you've enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. And if it's your first time here, I'm going to remind you to subscribe. Thanks for watching.